Good morning from a very rainy Saturday. We are hitting the road on a trip to North Carolina, and I'm inviting you all to join me as I read A Day of Fallen Night by Samantha Shannon, which I'm so excited about. I think all 850 plus pages will keep me occupied on our 13-hour drive. I'll report in throughout the trip and let you know what I'm thinking of the book. Thanks for being here. Also, in case you're wondering about the super weird pattern going on my face, it is raining like cats and dogs here. So our car is very streaky, and we will be hitting the road on a very rainy day. Sunday. We made it to North Carolina where we're staying for the week, and I wanted to give you all an update on the reading I was able to knock out on our 12-hour drive yesterday. I'm about 115 pages into the book A Day of Fallen Night, and we have really just met all of the main characters. I think I officially know how many perspectives we're going to be reading from. And we're just kind of diving back into the world, reestablishing some of the world building that she laid out in Priory of the Orange Tree. So these books follow a number of different perspectives and are very clearly going to be centered on sort of mother-daughter dynamics. The books open with the births of 3 different daughters in 3 different regions of the world. So the mother-daughter pair that we were following in Innis, Sabran, and Glorian are navigating a really precarious political environment after several monarchs who really let the country kind of go to waste. Glorian is kind of grappling with what it means to be required to have another child, and for that to be sort of her role and obligation as a monarch. Then we follow another mother-daughter pair in the eastern mountains of Seiki, where a high priestess running a temple in the mountains has a secret about her daughter actually being the child of the emperor. And we're seeing all of that unfold as well. And then we finally follow sort of a family of 3 in the south at the Priory of the Orange Tree, which is a sort of secret society of female warriors and mages who protect a magical tree. And they believe their purpose is also to keep the Nameless One at bay. Samantha Shannon's world building is obviously her strength. I mean, the world is so gorgeously written about, and we get incredible imagery around food and clothing and language, and so I love getting re-immersed into this world, and the characters are, I think, always another one of her strengths. Very interesting and nuanced, and coming from very different perspectives, which I really love about the world, the different sort of religions that resulted from one event a long time ago. I will say it's just very slow going because it is written in a slightly older version of English almost. It's just very heavily literary, and you have to take your time with it. So over the course of the 12-hour trip, I probably spent a good 6 to 7 hours reading, and I got 112 pages in. So it's definitely going to take me our full week here to kind of knock through it bit by bit, but I am loving it and really excited to see how all of the characters' sort of plot lines intertwine, because right now there's not a lot of plot going on. We're just sort of seeing the inklings and beginnings of conflict for each of the characters. We're off to a baseball game now, so I will check in with you all when I've read more. so much time has passed. Absolutely no reading has been done. We are here on Friday. It's been a week of working remotely and just kind of enjoying time with family while we've been staying here. So haven't been getting a lot of reading done in the evenings, like never more than a couple pages. But I thought I'd give you a quick update on our week and then let you know where I am in the book, because I've read about probably 50 pages total. We have spent the evenings just kind of hanging out with family. We did make a trip out to Spartanburg for dinner one night, and it was a really cute little town. I think I got some clips of a lot of the really sweet like murals and blooming trees that were out that day. And then we also spent time in Tryon and went to a movie at this like cute little one-room movie theater. So those were our sort of outings for the week. Today is Friday, and we did take today off to make a trip into Asheville. So it is raining cats and dogs, just like bucketing down. But we're gonna make our way out there later today, see the botanical gardens, maybe stop into a few cute shops. We've been planning to go to a baseball game. That is absolutely not happening. But yeah, that's how we've been spending our time. I'm sure you've seen like a few little clips of that. But I wanted to tell you a little bit about where I'm at in the book. So I am just a handful of pages away from the end of part 1. So just shy of 200 pages into this book, the exposition is kind of wrapping up, and the sort of facts of the story that are on the jacket of the book have finally emerged. So importantly, the thing that is seemingly going to tie all of our characters together and really lead us into the action-adventure plot of the book is that the Dreadmount has erupted for the first time in hundreds of years. The Dreadmount being the home of the evil dragon, the Nameless One, and the Nameless One does not appear to have come out, but several other of his like minion dragons have. So it only took like 200 pages to get there, but all of our other characters are in place. We finally have a character in the north. He is the sort of sailor soldier character who we briefly met, named Wolf, originally in the west, and he is now in the north. So we have characters at all 4 points of our world, and all of our characters are sort of in their place for the rest of the action to take place. In particular, our secret princess who is living in the High Mountain Temple has returned to the Emperor's palace to begin the process of taking her place back on the throne. So lots of really interesting like political machinations are sort of simmering, and we now have the more urgent premise that there are suddenly dragons back in the world during an age where dragons have not been seen in a very long time. So I am really excited. A very long opening, but I think that is pretty to be expected of a Samantha Shannon book, and I'm really looking forward to seeing where the story goes next. I might get in a bit of reading on our drive to Asheville today, and then we head home at the end of the weekend, so I will obviously get a lot more of my reading done on that drive home. So you will probably see some clips of us gallivanting around a very rainy Asheville, and then you will see more of my thoughts on the book later this week. Anyway, see you. Has been a minute. We've been back in Chicago for about a week, and I thought I would give you all a reading update because it has been a while since I gave the last one. I've finally made, I think, some really substantial headway in A Day of Fallen Night. I will say that
I forgot how long it took me to read the first book. Like, these are like 800-page books, but the writing style is very lyrical, and I think it's like intentionally slow, right? Like, we're building lots of stakes across lots of different players, and we're very much like taking our time to do that. So it just takes like forever to get through, right? Like, I'm having a good time, I'm enjoying the ride, but the reading pace here is just very different than my normal reading speed. I think it took me like over a month to read the first book. And when I originally started this vlog, I was like, okay, great. I'm going on a road trip, 2 13-hour drives, like easy peasy. I'll make it a week-long vlog. I think this is probably going to consume the entirety of my April. So just putting that out there now. We're changing our expectations, giving ourselves more time. So, in the last week, I completed part 2, and I have started part 3. So part 2 runs from page 183 to page 351, and I'm currently in part 3, which will take us all the way to page 697. I'm currently on page 434. So I'm like officially at the halfway point. I think this is like 850 pages. So I'm right there in the middle of the book. I thought I'd break up future updates basically by part. The first week of this vlog, which was during that road trip period, was really just getting into completing part 1 and starting part 2. But I thought I would offer today just some of my thoughts on part 2, and then the next time I check in, it'll be at the end of part 3. So one of the things that I loved so much about the first book, and that I didn't realize how much I was missing in the start of the second book, was the dragon riders, which were like a huge part of the first story. So in this story, the gods have been asleep for years in the East, gods being dragons, water dragons specifically. And so there's like nobody to ride the dragons because the dragons haven't been a part of society. And in the start of part 2, one of our characters becomes the first dragon rider in hundreds of years. And I just like immediately felt that like surge of like elation at seeing and imagining in my own mind a dragon rider. So that was really wonderful. I loved seeing that come back into this story. We're traveling kind of across the regions with each of our characters encountering these strange stone mounds, which I was sort of immediately like, these are obviously dragon eggs. And I was wrong. They're actually a little bit more complicated than that. But that's been really interesting to see how sort of each region handles reports of these strange new objects after the dread matter erupts and things start being really strange. I was really interested to find that we've got a bit of like an enemies to lovers situation maybe emerging. I might be jumping to conclusions, but it kind of feels like we have a fun, like contentious romance forming between a royal and a spy, which is really interesting, especially because we also had a royal and a spy in the first book, but their dynamic was meant to be very collaborative, whereas right now the folks we're looking at are very much like in conflict with one another and seem to have very different goals. So a lot of suspicion going on there, but also attraction, which is fun. Something that I didn't think very much about in the first book, which I read last year, but my partner Jake pointed out when I was kind of recapping what I was reading to him, is that in the first book, it was just sort of a fact of life that the dragons had brought with them a plague, and it made people really sick. You like started with red on your fingers, and then you would go like mad and think you were on fire. This book is where that dragon plague emerges. And so it is this like unknown, terrifying threat that they don't really know how to contain. They don't really know how it spreads. They aren't entirely sure where it's even coming from. And I was describing that to Jake, and I was like, it's so interesting. It's really resonating with me, having just lived through a pandemic. And then he was like, yeah, especially the zoonotical disease component. Like he made that leap that I hadn't yet, right? Which is that like oftentimes we talk about dragons in lots of different magical contexts, but nobody else that I know of has made the leap of like, this is a big foreign magical animal. It brings disease that would impact humans differently. So I think that's really fun, and certainly strikes me differently now than I think it would have had I read the first book when it came out in like 2019. I also have suspicions that we have a bad guy from our first book returning in this book, as one of our key bad guys was immortal in the last one. And she seems to be kind of infiltrating the Priory. So I'm very curious to see where that goes. I'm deeply suspicious of her, and I think she might be behind some of the conflict that's broiling in the Priory. And in the West, we are seeing the sort of political ramifications of the Dreadmount erupting, really coming into conflict with that core belief that the royal line keep the Nameless One at bay. People don't really understand, like, did creatures come out of the Dreadmount when it erupted, or did it just erupt and that's what, like, fire mounts do? And it seems like some people are now drawing the conclusion that the Dreadmount erupted because the Nameless One is actually out there somewhere, and he's returning. And that means that the royals are liars and they can't protect us. And so there's an assassination attempt on somebody very important in the West. And we kind of see the ramifications of that, as well as part 2 kind of wrapping with a really dramatic death. Particularly, we see and kind of have confirmed for the first time in the full second part that dragons definitely did emerge from the Dreadmount when it erupted. That wasn't a hallucination from some of our characters. We know definitively that that happened. And they are unleashing their full, terrifying power on the region. So lots of moving parts happening here. I think we're getting to really see the dynamics that were set up in part 1 play out and be tested a little bit in part 2. And I think we're really being set up to see a lot of character growth and really pushing the boundaries of how these characters understand themselves in part 3. I'm really continuing to love all the themes around motherhood, pregnancy, what it means to be obligated to have an heir, and grief and loss around the loss of a child and the loss of, like, childlike innocence. It's just really wonderful to have a book with so many lead women, and grappling with the ways in which pregnancy and motherhood are often coded on somebody's existence just because they are a woman. And also how those have been threaded into core avenues of power for women. So I think that is just such a great theme to get to sit with for so long, and really kind of let that strike you in different ways kind of as the book progresses. Now that I'm in the start of part 3, we are definitely, like, picking up the action and seeing new parts of the world. So I'm really enjoying that, and I'm hopeful to see where that goes. Anyway, that's the update I have for you now. I'm going to get back to reading, and I will probably check in with a part 3 update later. I will say that I have started to read other things in the interim because this is just, like, such a big thing to pick up, and I know when I pick it up it will be slow. I have started the audiobook for Infamous by Lex Croucher, which I am loving. I highly recommend Lex Croucher's books. They are, like, historical romance with, like, Bridgerton-esque fun and aesthetics, but, like, very modern humor, and they always grapple with, like, different elements of LGBTQ identity. So that's a blast. Highly recommend. I'll give a little recap of that later in this video, given that I'm also consuming it at the same time. And I also just finished the first volume of Witch Hat Atelier, which is a manga series that everybody on the internet has been raving about. It's so good. It's so cute. Goes really quickly. It's a story of this young girl who lives in a world where she believes you have to be born a witch to use magic, and has always really wished that she was a witch. And then one day she sees a witch using magic and realizes she might be able to wield it herself, and kind of her world turns upside down from there. But the art is gorgeous, the characters are really sweet, and it feels like we are setting up to have a lot of complex conversations around these really, like, fantastical characters. So that's really wonderful. I will recap any other reading I do on that front later in this video as well. Morning, everyone. Happy Saturday.
Jake is off getting some work done on the car, and I have the whole of Saturday morning to myself. So I thought I would just kind of cozy up and catch up on my reading a little bit. I also wanted to show you all this amazing teacup I recently got. It's like a handmade ceramic. I think that the design is just incredible, and it really reminds me of dragon scales, which I'm currently obsessed with, given that I am reading all about A World with Dragons. So I'm just like delighting in this as of late, and that I would have a warm drink this morning while I read. So I just had to momentarily brag about that, and I'm gonna cozy up and read. The book. This thing took so long to read, but let's go ahead and wrap parts 3 and 4 and talk about my sort of overall feelings on the book. So, A Day of Fallen Night by Samantha Shannon took me a full month and a half to read. I picked this up on April 1st at the start of a road trip and was, for some unknown reason, very confident that I would read it in the week that we were away. And I finished this book on May 15th, yesterday. So yeah, it took a full 6 weeks to read. That being said, it's a fantastic book, and I'm not mad that it took that long. It's just a very different kind of reading to the like more fast-paced action-adventure stories, or even like YA stories that are written in the same voice as, you know, you might think or talk to yourself. And so those just go so much faster. Let's get into the details. So part 3 of this book opens with the death of another major ruler on the continent, which, you know, really heightens the political stakes for more of our characters, although some had already really faced heightened stakes in part 2. We also just really see the world devolving in this part of the book. So it's year 3 in the 4 years that we follow, and it's the first sort of full year since the Dreadmount erupted. We see worms, or the fire-breathing dragons, and their many minions that have hatched, just dominating across the world, causing pure chaos, right? So we now not only have problems with the harvest because a volcano erupted and sort of interfered with our normal harvest season, but we now also have all these monsters that are ravaging our communities. So all of our main characters are dealing with like this complete shift in their world. Some of them are more warriors, and we see them fighting and living with the stakes of this sort of like war with the worms. And then others who have more political power are, you know, searching for answers, trying to sort of puzzle how we can beat these dragons, what happened before, what can we do now. There's also the spread of the plague, which comes up in part 2. So again, they're like living with the spread of the plague. How are they managing it, given that they don't understand exactly how it spreads? There's lots of like washing hands with vinegar and wearing cloths over their mouths, which is just, I don't know, it's really different having like lived through a pandemic personally. It was an unexpectedly like resonant part of the book. As part 3 comes to a close, we really see the like impact of this year of terror on all of our characters' lives. They lose loved ones in their personal lives, and this section ends with the death of
another major leader. So there's been almost like full political turnaround over the course of these 3 years, with major leaders who are impacting our characters' lives dying. Part 4 is pretty short, sort of the last year of the crisis that the book follows, and it's where, you know, all of this hard-won information comes to pass in helping them sort of bring the crisis to an end. It really just kind of wraps with all of our characters kind of making their final decisions in the wake of this sort of crisis period and its ending. I would say the ending really struck me as like a very bittersweet one. It felt like there weren't any loose ends. We had a sense of where each of the characters kind of was in their life and in their sort of mental peace by the end. But you know, not everybody got like a sparkly, happy ending. It was really varied, I would say, in the kinds of outcomes in living with the aftermath of this experience. And I mean, that makes sense, right? Like, that's very real life. And I appreciate that Samantha Shannon like leaned into the fact that all of these people were going to be living with like big time trauma and a lot of the political machinations that were either heightened or put on hold during the war still needed to be dealt with, right? Like, still had consequences. We get to see in the very end several kind of core functions of the world that we know in Priory kind of come to pass and come into existence. For example, if you read Priory of the Orange Tree, we know that Seiki is ruled by a warlord, but in the course of this book, like, that's not a term that's used for most of the book, and so we see the first person take the first title of warlord of Seiki. And so, you know, there's little moments like that where there is this sense of payoff for having read the first book and now getting this little peek behind the curtain of like, oh, that's what inspired this sort of political structure or like this decision. So I really liked that too. It was like it felt like an Easter egg, you know, there was no loss of value there if you hadn't read the first book, but it did feel like a little treat for folks who maybe have already read Priory. Overall, I really loved this book. I think I struggle sometimes with my internal dialogue around how long it took and feeling like I should have moved through it quicker. But I don't think that that's a fair way to like judge the book. Like, the book was incredibly immersive, and that was my experience of Priory as well. It's just that, like, if you want to be swept away, completely immersed in a new place, like, this book will do that. The cast of characters was really interesting and diverse, and the storylines each character lived through were really interesting. And I think interesting in a way that was like personally impactful what they were living through, even if they weren't all living through like the most politically dramatic thing. Like, some of them were, but some of them weren't. And their stories were still like valuable and interesting to me, even though they weren't, you know, perhaps like the singular hero of the story or, you know, a monarch of some kind. The writing is just so beautiful. It's so lyrical. I think I definitely cried a couple times reading this book, just as some of these like really painful personal topics were discussed by characters. You really get to like be in their heads. And the story really like takes its time to unfold. You know, we follow so many characters across 4 years of time during this crisis, and you know, there are moments early in the book where you're kind of like, okay, I don't really know why this is significant, but I'm here, I'm interested, I'm having a good time. And I think by the time you finish it, I found myself being really grateful for some of those smaller, seemingly less significant moments as we opened that just taught me so much about where the characters were coming from and like what were the important dynamics in their lives, in order to then see how those changed and impacted them over the course of the war. It's nice that she takes the time to really like lay all of that out, you know? She's in no rush If you're reading this, you're in no rush. Story, I thought, built really nicely. It made sense the way stakes escalated. And I think the ending of this book had slightly better payoff for me than the first one. The first one sort of ends in this like massive battle, and it's just like when you've read 700 pages and then the battle is like, 20 pages. It doesn't always feel like proportionate. We've been building and building and building to not really feel like the apex of that was quite there. I was very much okay walking away from that book with that sense that like it wasn't the most jaw-dropping part of the book. But this book, I did feel like I was more satisfied with the ending. And I think part of that is that like this book isn't resolved by like individual people being like heroes. Like there are heroic moments, there are politically savvy moments, there are warriors fighting in this war, but a lot of it is like out of their control. Just being with people of import, and people who we have come to care about so much, being in this place of like just waiting on the solution to arise, and doing our best in the interim to get through that period of time. I think that's really interesting, and it also made for a slightly more satisfying ending, because I wasn't expecting any singular person to be the agent of change that like ended the war. There were like much bigger things at play that were out of our control. Overall, I would say I really loved this book. I'm so glad to have revisited this world. I'm really curious what the third book she's gonna write will be. And I think it's just full of such like immaculate world building and wonderful exploration of like powerful, complex female characters. Lots of great like feminist themes sort of interwoven in the world. And I love the little ways that she chooses to infuse magic into the world. So, to recap, I really loved this book. I thought it was really beautiful, really interesting, and a testament to Samantha Shannon's incredible world-building skills. I would highly recommend this to anybody who loves like epic, high fantasy, people who don't mind an incredibly large cast of characters. And I would definitely recommend this to anybody who loves lyrical writing, anyone who loves dragons, or anyone who's looking for a more feminist story that centers on a lot of like fantasy and monarchy tropes. Overall, I gave this a 4.5 stars, and I'm really looking forward to what comes next in the Roots of Chaos series. And thanks for being here. I will say this was a much longer vlog than I expected. We've covered a great deal of time, and I'm honestly not sure what footage I have. So we'll see. We'll find that out together in this video. But thanks for being here, and I will see you all next time when I'm talking through my next book. Bye!